Hello and welcome to Artifacts, the show on City Cable 34 in which we talk about the arts and what's going on in Minneapolis. Now later on we're going to have Pam Perri here. She is the Executive Director of Minnesota Citizens for the Arts, and she'll be telling us about what they're doing in this legislative session. But first I have, and I'm pleased to have as a guest, Steve Cramer, who's with the Minneapolis City Council. He's one of the mayoral candidates here in Minneapolis, and we've been inviting in sequence each of the candidates to come on to Artifacts and talk about the arts and culture in Minneapolis and their view of the city's role with the arts. Steve, thanks for joining us on the
Phil.
show.
Nice to be here.
Glad to have you.
Yeah.
I wondered if we could just start a conversation about your view of the arts in Minneapolis, how they contribute, and what it means, what the value of the arts are to the citizens of Minneapolis.
Well, we're truly blessed in Minneapolis to have such a wide variety of, and such a rich variety of artistic endeavors from the major institutions that are world famous. When I talk to my colleagues in municipal government across the country, they all know about, or many of them know about, the Walker and the Guthrie and those institutions. But I think what's really unique, we're very fortunate to have those, but what's really unique is the tremendous variety of grassroots and neighborhood-based artistic companies and programs that allow citizens to not only take advantage of cultural events, but also in many cases participate. And that becomes part of the fabric of neighborhoods, fabric of the community, that when you get right down to it, makes a difference between a successful city and a city that probably is not going to make it over the long run. So I think it's a tremendous and very important part of that fabric of our community.
Well, now, I know you've talked on other issues, but about the importance of offering some positive alternatives for young people and the folks in the community. Can you talk a little bit about what you think might be able to work out with the arts and young people, or how we can better do a job there?
Well, I think our challenge is to find constructive ways for young people, many of whom, frankly, are feeling, I think, more and more alienated and withdrawn from the community around them. Our challenge as a community is to find ways for them to plug in, to find a constructive outlet for the innate talents and abilities that I think all people have. You can just find that magic spark that turns somebody towards writing a play or writing poetry or doing a mural or whatever artistic activity might really turn that person on. And I think we can do that through parks programs as we have been. I think the Arts Commission has a number of exciting grassroots, neighborhood-based efforts that have been just very successful in bringing kids in who you might not expect to plug into an arts program, but they do. And once they're there, I think for themselves, hidden talents are unlocked, and self-esteem, I suspect, is improved. And that's the key. Whether they go on to a career in the arts or not is really secondary. What's important is that they found a way to connect with something that's sort of larger than their immediate issues they're dealing with in their life or with their family, something that gives them some hope for the future. And again, a feeling of self-esteem. I can do this and it has value. And that's awfully important as we think about how we're going to deal with the core city and making sure that those neighborhoods stay strong and vital.
Well, just hearing what you're saying now, you're obviously aware of many of the things that the city does with the arts. It's a time of challenge, too. Physically, the recession, we may be coming out of it, and elements about that. But what challenges might be facing the city, and how might some of those challenges affect what the city can do in terms of the arts, whether it's young people or some of the institutions we're talking about?
Yeah. Well, one of our main challenges is the fiscal challenge. We're in a time when I think resources for municipal government are static, essentially. Our tax base has declined in the last few years, which is a marked departure from the decade of the 80s when we were booming. State government is stressed, and so the level of assistance from the state is even at best. And the national government, while there's been political change recently that's hopeful for municipalities, I don't think any of us expect major infusions of dollars. So we have static resources, yet we have growing needs. And one of the things we have to do then is set priorities and decide where we're going to invest our resources. I think from a municipal government standpoint, as I said, the arts make a huge contribution towards the life of our community. And we in turn have, as a city, invested in a number of ways that support arts and cultural activities in the city, whether it's providing theater venues like the State Theater and the Orpheum, or more grassroots and neighborhood-based programs like those through the Arts Commission. I think we will continue those commitments. I don't foresee, at least in my opinion, a major expansion or major new investments by the city directly in arts along this spectrum. I think we'll continue to look for ways to be supportive, continue past commitments, be open to new ideas and new partnerships, but as a major area for additional expenditures, given everything else we're up against and given this climate of austerity, I don't foresee that. That doesn't mean we're not supportive. That doesn't mean there aren't ways to be helpful and to build partnerships to make sure that art and culture play a role in strengthening our neighborhoods and keeping our city viable. But I don't think that's going to be done by way of dollars in all cases.
Well, you mentioned the physical challenge that's ahead of us. And maybe, since we've got you in the show, we could get just a few of your thoughts, your expertise or your insight on what might be coming down the pipe, either from Washington or at the state level. Of course, the governor delivered his budget address not too long back.
Right.
Whether it relates directly to the arts or not, but what's your forecast for how Minneapolis is going to be doing? Because that would affect the arts and many other sectors,
very
obviously.
definitely, very definitely.
What do you think the rest of '93 and even into '94 might look like?
Yeah. Well, we're well into the legislative session now in 1993, and unlike past years, the governor has not put a major reduction in state aid on the table, and so that's a helpful starting point as we begin working with the legislators. I would guess that our state-local fiscal relationship has stabilized now, but at a much lower level than in terms of direct state aid than we've experienced in the past. In terms of the national government, it's a little too early to tell. The Clinton administration's been there now for a couple of months, and they're beginning to get some legislative activity going. I just think that the fiscal problem at the national government level is so deep and so broad that while we have a more receptive audience in Washington now, an administration I think will develop an urban domestic policy that will help cities. Again, I don't expect to see that played out in terms of huge new infusions of funds. So I think we're healthy financially. We're one of the few core cities that can say that. We're stable, but we just have to be more and more conscious about setting priorities and then investing our funds and using them wisely so that we get a good effect and a good impact and have responsive services for the citizens of our community. That includes the arts along with everything else that we do.
Well, I think that puts it in a nice context for most of our viewers here. We've only got a minute or so left, and I just wondered, maybe a little off the wall, but what does the Cramer family like to do in terms of an arts night out or cultural activities or whatever?
The Cramer family includes my wife, Debbie, and who is a nurse in St. Paul, and my daughter, Anna, who is very artistically inclined. She dances. She loves to sing. The only kind of movie she'll watch are the old musicals.
She loves those.
So I know all the songs from White Christmas and Mary Poppins and Sound of Music. So a good artistic night for us is maybe going to a play at a dinner theater. Anna loves that sort of thing. We go to a lot of movies. She enjoys that. And we go to all our dance recitals.
Oh, I bet, sure.
We really take advantage often of what the community has to offer.
Does Dad sing along with some of those songs?
I'm a very poor singer, so she actually stops me from singing.
I see.
She says, "Dad, I'm doing a solo."
Right. She knows her stage.
That's right.
Well, Steve, thanks a lot for being on
Thanks, Phil.
Artifacts, sharing your thoughts on this, and good luck in the coming year.
Thank you.
Thank you much. Great. Now, we'll be back in a moment with our second guest, Pam Perri, but if you'll stay tuned for just a moment, we've got an interesting fact about the arts in Minneapolis. And welcome back. That was an interesting fact about how much they spent on that particular project. And now for this part of the show, it's my pleasure to introduce Pam Perri. She's the Executive Director of Minnesota Citizens for the Arts, and she'll tell us a little bit more about what that is. I've been longing to have you on the show for quite a while, so thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for
Great.
having me.
And rather than have me do it, why don't you just tell us what Minnesota Citizens for the Arts is and who it is and what you all do?
Sure. Minnesota Citizens for the Arts is an advocacy organization. Our sole purpose is to influence legislation that would affect the arts community. We work mostly on the state level, so we try to increase funding for the arts from the state. We also work on issues regarding nonprofit organizations, any type of legislation that would affect an arts organization, taxes, really runs the gamut. Whatever the state legislature is coming up with at the time, we are there to protect the arts community.
And maybe we can get into a few details in a little bit.
Sure, absolutely.
Sure. But what's the history and...
Well, MCA's been around for about 16 or 17 years, and it was initially started by a group of large institutions who wanted to go to the state capitol and get state funding. Well, they trotted up to the state capitol and found out that most of the legislators who were making decisions about arts funding at that time were not from the Twin Cities. They were rural legislators, and so they didn't get any money that first year out. So they went back and tried to put together a grassroots coalition of arts organizations from outside the Twin Cities, individual artists, volunteers who were involved in small arts organizations in towns all across the state. And they put together a coalition with the large institutions and the small groups, went up to the state capitol, and their first year out together, they increased funding by something like $2 million. So the concept of a coalition between rural and metro, large and small, is something that was started 15, 16 years ago, and we continue to work on that.
And I know that mechanically some of what you influence is the distribution of funds through both the State Arts Board and the Regional Arts Councils?
Right. In the early 80s, the state of Minnesota decided that they wanted to fund rural arts organizations specifically. So there's a line item in the budget of the Minnesota State Arts Board that goes directly to those regional arts councils. And we make sure that those regional arts councils continue to stay strong and get funding.
And that's part of that alliance or that partnership that you were talking about?
Right, part of the coalition.
Well, now this, as we sit here, the show is airing in February, so the 78th legislative session is up.
Right.
How does it look for the arts? I know not too long ago the governor gave his budget address.
Right.
Any surprises or challenges in there for the arts or in the legislature?
Well, no. Every state agency this year had to take a mandatory 5% cut in funding. So the Minnesota State Arts Board had to submit their budget with a 5% decrease in funding. And then there was a possibility that the governor in his budget address could have knocked off more funding for the arts, but he didn't. So we were real pleased about that, especially in light of the history with Governor Carlson has been that 2 years ago he recommended a 22% cut in funding. Last year he recommended a 10% cut in funding, and this year he just held the line at the 5%. So we're real pleased about that. I should go back and say 2 years ago we were able to counter Governor Carlson's request with a 22% cut, and we ended up only with like a 2 or 3% cut. So we balanced it out.
So that was the effort of MCA?
Right.
Yeah.
We very much protected the arts community from those types of fronts.
Sure. So MCA is organized, obviously, you're the executive director, if I have the title right.
Right.
You have a board of directors.
I have a huge board.
Huge.
I've got 36 members on my board. Half of them are from the metro area, half of them are from outside the 7-county metro area. They come from all types of organizations. They're individual artists, they're volunteers in the arts, they're administrators of large institutions. I really have a real good mix.
Well, now this show airs in Minneapolis, and I wondered if you could give us some examples of some of the kinds of issues that you work on that might affect not only the institutions here in Minneapolis, obviously the major ones have a direct interest in what's happening at the State Arts Board, but perhaps by extension, even some of the more grassroots kind of things. What are some of the issues that you have to struggle with? MCA goes to the Capitol and talks about.
Funding is our primary, always on our primary legislative agenda. And in terms of funding organizations in Minneapolis, the Minnesota State Arts Board, which gives money to organizations for general operating support, really is supporting something like 45 organizations in Minneapolis, from the Walker Arts Center and the Guthrie to Theatre de la Junelune, Mixed Blood Theatre, Red Eye, through the Minnesota State Arts Board or through the Regional Arts Council. So maintaining that funding is really primary for us. Another issue that we try to protect the arts community from is taxes. In a situation where we are at this year, that the state's got a $700 million budget deficit roughly, they look to those areas that are currently not paying taxes. Obviously the nonprofit community is one of those areas that we don't pay sales tax on our tickets, we don't pay any type of property taxes, and so there have been proposals in the legislature that would require organizations to start paying a sales tax on those tickets, or start paying some type of property tax to cover police and fire if they're owning property. So those are the types of things that we also work on.
Well, now specifically about that, but even in general, are you optimistic? What's your take on this legislative session? And
I'm not sure yet.
Too early to tell?
Yeah, it's really too early to tell. I think come the middle of March and April, we'll be able to have a better idea of where things are coming from. We've got two very strong art supporters in the legislature who control arts funding. Senator Dick Cohen, who's from St. Paul, and also Representative Jim Rice, who's from North Minneapolis, are two legislators that really are probably our best champions and are also in charge of arts funding. So I feel real confident with those two at the helm, so to speak, for the arts. But in terms of the tax issues, you know, I don't know. It really depends. There's a lot of things involved in how that.
Shift gears just a little bit. Arts education. Steve Cramer, who was on the first part of the show, we were talking about positive alternatives for young people. Arts education is a close topic to my heart. Any thought on the legislature's role with arts education? I'm thinking K through 12 mostly, school districts throughout the state, and obviously there's an effect here in Minneapolis.
Well, in terms of specific details about arts and education, I can't really help you. What I do know is that the arts throughout the state are, whenever school boards are looking at cutting budgets, the arts are always the first to be cut. We work closely with the Minnesota Alliance for Arts and Education, which is a group much like ours, but they are only working on arts and education issues. And they're trying to get some mandatory credits for K through 12 for people who are graduating. They need arts credits. We should, our focus mainly is making sure that there's art in the school. There are a lot of schools and school districts throughout the state who have no access to teachers who are teaching art or individual artists who are coming through school. So we really try to concentrate on access and getting those people out to those schools that don't have the money to pay for an art teacher. So.
Okay, well thanks. It gives a little bit of a context to it.
The details I can't give.
There may be viewers out there saying, the arts obviously viable, very active in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. I didn't know we had an advocacy group. I mean, literally out there lobbying, doing the good work. How does a Pam Perri get involved? What's your background? How does somebody develop a career for what you're doing?
Well, I came into it pretty oddly. I originally grew up in the Chicago-Milwaukee areas. In fact, right smack dab between those two cities. And my mother was an arts activist. So we were in Chicago in the Chicago Symphony, or we'd go to the Milwaukee Rep, whatever. So I always had an affinity towards the arts. I am not artistic in any matter, or in any way, shape, or form, but came to the University of Minnesota about 12 years ago to get my degree in communications, and then got involved in political campaigns. And city council races, Hennepin County, then a state senate race, and then worked for a presidential campaign in 1988. And my political mentor got me involved in lobbying, and then the job came up with Minnesota.
So you're kind of putting the love of the arts and your political activities together.
Right. And art and politics is a strange marriage, but it's been interesting.
What, I think we only have a minute or two left, but what's the kind of typical thing you do when you're over in St. Paul? I mean, what do you spend time doing during the day?
Well, it's mostly visiting different legislators, talking about the importance of the arts in our society. It's been, recently we've been having to justify the arts based on economic development and how the arts are contributing to the economy of the city and the state, which is unfortunate because I think the arts have also an important spiritual role in our lives, and that's a little bit.
So the economic message is you're playing to the audience that you think
Yes,
that's what they need to hear.
Right.
Yeah.
But I wish I could spend more time on talking about the importance of the arts in people's lives. But
Yeah. But that's not necessarily the nature of
not
what's going on.
Not this year. Hopefully, in
Sure.
a year where there's more money at the state, we can start talking about those types of things. But
5 years from now, what do you think Minnesota's going to look like, arts, culture?
I hope that both the state and the city realize the importance of the arts, economically and spiritually, and really start putting money into it. I hope that that's the case.
Okay.
But
If people wanted to get involved with Citizens for the Arts, how can they do it? Is there a phone number or?
sure, they can call me at my office. We're a real small staff. It's myself and an assistant. Our number is 612-338-2970. And we love volunteers.
Okay, and as I understand it, it's just coincidental, but your office is in Minneapolis.
That's right, in the Itasca building.
Okay, down along the riverfront.
That's right.
Great. Well, Pam, thanks for sharing all this with us.
Thank you.
Good luck in the legislative session.
Thank you. We'll need it.
Glad you're on the show. Thanks. Well, I hope you enjoyed this show. If you have questions about anything we've talked about or you want more information about anything, give the City Cable 34 hotline a call, 673-2234. I think that number's on the screen. And we'll be back next month with some interesting guests. I've been looking forward to that show for a long time. And please do stay tuned. We have a short calendar of events of things that are going on here in Minneapolis.
Four.
Hello and welcome to Artifacts, the monthly show on City Cable 34 in which we talk about the arts and some issues that relate to the arts here in the city of Minneapolis. A little bit later on I'm going to have two guests talking about art in public places, or perhaps public art, and I'm looking forward to that segment. But first I'm going to introduce two gentlemen here to talk about some facilities, major facilities in downtown Minneapolis, and what it takes to run those facilities, and maybe some of the surprises and a little bit of the history. And I'm talking specifically about the State Theater and the Hennepin Center for the Arts down on Hennepin Avenue. I want to introduce John Linnerson, who is the building supervisor, I believe, at Hennepin Center, and Dave Marietta, I'm not sure your exact title.
Operations manager.
Operations manager at the State and Orpheum Theaters as well. So thanks for joining me, and welcome to the show. I'd met both of you a couple years ago, and I've been looking forward for about that long to have you on the show and talk a little bit about what it is you folks do to make those facilities run. And I think where I was coming from was that most people come to a show or an event at one of your facilities, sit down in a seat, watch something wonderful, or maybe not so wonderful, whatever, but really have no idea what it takes to make those facilities, those large physical plants, run. So I thought we might just start, get a little bit of history about what you do. What's the nature of your job over at Hennepin Center for the Arts, John?
Well, we have to keep track of many different kinds of spaces. There's office spaces, theater spaces, classroom spaces. People are rehearsing. We've got restaurants, and so there's quite a variety of things that happen at Hennepin Center for the Arts. We're open 20 hours a day almost.
20 hours a day?
Yeah.
Sure, 'cause the nature of
and
the
keep
business
going
is
through the weekend, yeah.
Classes and rehearsals start early, and then the shows and set takedown probably go late into the night. Yeah. Dave, what's your job like over at these two facilities?
Well, it's twofold. The first concern is the building itself and its needs. It's constantly reminds you that it has needs, and there's constant breakdowns and whatnot, so you have to take care of the building. And then the second concern is the people in it, the clients. I sit down with them before they come in and help them plan their shows and tell them what it takes to get whatever it is they want accomplished. And then once the shows start, it's a long, long process. It's quite often I'll get in 60 hours a week.
All prep for a show?
No, actually running the show.
Running the show
Running
itself.
the show itself. So.
Wow. Well, in a moment, I know we've got some tape from both of your facilities. We're going to take a look at the State and the Hennepin Center. But just a quick background on how you individuals got involved in this. John, I know you go back in the arts here a long time.
Way back into the 60s, when my sister Beth Lennerson started the Moffat Theaters over on the West Bank. She asked me to help out things. That was back when they were tearing down the library on Hennepin Avenue, and we went in there and got seats and platforms and brought that over to Mama Rose's on the West Bank.
Library.
Yep, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was another old building in this same on the same avenue.
Sure.
But that one didn't survive.
Right.
Um,
And the Moffat Players, of course, evolved into what
Into
we
the
now call
Children's Theater,
Children's
right. And they worked with Lois Holton doing a Christmas show in Nutcracker, and that grew and grew and grew, and that's where I met Dave.
So the two of you go
Northrop.
back a ways.
Oh, yes.
Okay. And what's your background in this theatrical business?
Well, my family was in the theatrical business since 1910, somewhere around there. My grandfather was the carpenter at Radio City, which is now WCCO building. My grandmother was in the wardrobe. She was a wardrobe business agent for the union. And my mother works in wardrobe. So we were always in and around the theaters, even when we were kids.
Yeah.
Roaming around the State Theater when I was a little kid, I can remember that. So
That's right.
it was pretty exciting to see it all get restored.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have memories of the Orpheum in particular, probably in its earliest heyday.
Yes, well, I was at the Orpheum for the last 15 years,
Oh, I see. Okay.
taking care of that place. So
All right.
yeah.
Well, now we have tape. Let's start with the State Theater. I think they'll call it up here, and we can take a look at it. And as we're doing it, and as our viewers take a look at what we're seeing, why don't you just describe a little bit about what we're seeing? And as I understand, this was taped as you were loading in Evita.
Evita. Evita was actually loaded in at this time.
Well, at the time that this was. Okay, now what are we looking at here?
Okay, we have a state-of-the-art facility, and one thing it takes to put on our shows is a counterweight system. You can see all the ropes there and pipes. There's actually a pipe every 6 inches going all the way up and down stage, and for a lot of these shows we have lighting instruments or scenery or cables, whatever, hanging on every one of those 60 pipes. It's a game of inches in the theater, and we have the type of facility that can accommodate just about anything.
With not a whole lot of room to spare, is what you're saying.
No, it's a game of inches. This is the basement area, which fills wall to wall with wardrobe. This is a computer console. This is kind of interesting. The electrician runs his board from the basement. He doesn't even look at what he's doing.
Doesn't see what he's affecting.
Doesn't even see what he's affecting.
Now, who's playing chess here?
This is in the stars room.
Okay.
So.
Now, is that particular to that star, or do you always keep a chess set around in case?
No, that's his chess set. We have facilities for 66 people to dress, and that was a large chorus room. And the wardrobe room. Every square inch of the basement is filled during one of these shows. That's the balcony railing, lighting instruments.
I think we're going to see some nice detailing, too, that was carefully restored in this.
I think probably the best thing that they did was the paint job.
Yeah.
It's just gorgeous what they... And it was a 4-step process in a lot of cases. The gold was actually layered on 4 different steps.
Oh. So some real technical skill went into this. It wasn't simply come in and paint it.
No. And there's talk about getting, those were the organ girls, there's talk about getting an organ reinstalled in the State Theater.
That'd be nice. Now here's obviously some of the sound system.
A cluster of speakers that handles the upstairs.
And those change, or at least their location may change show to show.
Yes, they do.
Depends on who's coming in and what
yes,
they
they
need.
do. The most spectacular thing about the theater is the artwork.
Yeah.
That was on the ceiling there in the center, that was for the bass notes of the organ. Come out. The murals on the side there were covered with acoustic tile and almost lost. It was very hard to bring them back. They spent hours and hours and hours trying to bring those murals back.
And we just saw the sound booth or something up there?
The sound booth. And we have a movie screen that is 45 feet wide by 25 high. It completely fills the whole proscenium. It's the biggest screen around, I believe.
Wow.
So it's we have state-of-the-art movie facilities.
And the hall is used not only for Broadway shows and theatrical productions and musical, but companies have meetings in there, and a variety of uses go on.
We have a one room there, we call it the Walker Room, where we have meetings going just about every day.
Quickly, what are we seeing right here?
Well, this is, that was my home for a long time, the Orpheum, and what we're doing is taking the back wall of the theater off, and we've actually moved the road.
Yeah, that's 10th Street there.
Yes, that's 10th Street. We've moved the road to make room for the expansion of the stage house, and this is all in preparation for Miss Saigon, which is coming in December.
And I understand you have a pretty tight schedule for completing the work and
yes.
loading in that show.
Yes, it's maddening.
Yeah, I bet.
I have a meeting today I'm going to. It's fun to listen to them. They start getting nervous as it gets closer. But the stage house will be expanded from 35 feet to 56 feet deep.
Well, that's major.
And that'll be enough room for the helicopter that's in Miss Saigon.
Great. Let's move on to the Hennepin Center for the Arts. I know we've got some tape, and by the way, I wanted to mention that I thought the staff did an excellent job on coming in and taking a look there at the state. And John, maybe as we start rolling here with the Hennepin Center, you can tell us what we're looking at. Now, as you mentioned earlier, you've got a couple of theaters in there and a major dance space. And what else do you have in there, or who else is working in there? Hennepin Center?
Well, there are other offices like Milkweed and other small theater groups, Theater Exchange, the Northern Sign Theater.
Right, oh, here we go. Now, these are some historical.
This is outside a long time ago. This is what it looked like before the renovation in '79. Kenny's Shoe Store was on the first floor. We moved into that space. Our Minnesota Dance Theater was in that space before the renovation. And this is a picture now, as it looks now after the renovation. This is the front entrance on Hennepin Avenue. It was built as a Mason's temple. Up on the 8th floor, where we are right now, is the Bauer Hawthorne Theater. It seats about 300 people. This was originally a gymnasium, the Masons called it. They had a special floor in there. It was a wide open space and had parties and meetings up there. It was not a very ornate space. You can see these arched beams up there they had little lights all along them though. This is the lighting system that we have at the 8th floor. It's a fixed grid, and this is a scene shop space right behind the Bauer Hawthorne Theater. We've got all set up for painting and...
You've had a number of groups home-based in there over the years.
Yeah, it was built for the Cricket Theater, and then Jules Loon and the Illusion Theater have been the primary tenants. Now we're down on the 6th floor. This was the primary lodge for the Masons, and Minnesota Dance Alliance now uses it for their performances. This is the 2nd floor, little theater space. Seats about 120. It's a turnkey operation. We just give the space over to somebody and they get to run it. This is one of the studio spaces. There are 9 studios in the building, equipped with special floors, bars, and mirrors. You will see all the ornate work that the Masons have done in this space. This is what holds up the building, these limestone piers. And that goes all the way up to the top of the building.
Yeah, these are interior shots now.
Right.
We're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Well, your facility has certainly contributed a lot to the cultural health of this community.
Dave might recognize this.
It was out in front of the State Theater.
Yeah, it used to be the old ticket booth. It's been in our lobby now.
So it moved down the
since
street
renovation.
to your area. That's great. Well, we've only got about a moment left here, another minute or so, and I just wanted one quick question from either of you. Any big surprises, or what's the strangest thing you've ever had to deal with or improvise on in either of your facilities? There must be some stories here.
The biggest thing that ever happened to me, I guess, was the big flood right before the show. Sprinkler pipe broke in the wall and shot 200 gallons a minute up over the top of the dome at the Orpheum and filled the balcony up with water until it was actually going over the top and down below. What to do? The fire department rescued me, squeegeed it all out, got rid of all of my water. It was miraculous that they came to my rescue.
The show went on.
And the show went on.
That's amazing. Any particular unusual thing?
Floods are certainly
You too,
one you
then.
remember. I guess the big thing was the Glicks fire next door. When that caught fire and was very close by, we lost a lot of windows and had damage, but that certainly was the biggest surprise.
So fire and water we've had encounters with.
Yeah.
I wish we could go on, and maybe we'll have you back another time, because I think we just touched the surface. John, I want to thank you for coming by. It was great to talk with you. Dave, thanks so much. Now, we'll be back in just a moment with a couple people to talk about public art, or art in the outdoors. But first, please take a look at this interesting fact about the arts in Minneapolis. And welcome back. I'm very excited now to have 2 guests on that I've been looking forward to talking with for a while. Bob Close is a landscape architect and been involved in a number of projects here in the city of Minneapolis. And Peter Boswell is the associate curator at the Walker Arts Center. And what I wanted to talk about in this segment is art in public spaces. Sometimes people might say public art, and it's not always that it's funded by the public. But there's sort of a convergence here, I think, in the two disciplines, if you will. And just before we went to tape here, Bob was mentioning something very interesting about what I would think of as intentional space. I wondered if you could share with us just what you were saying about Theodore Wirth Parkway.
Well, it's to many people, it's a natural space, a space that just sort of happened to be that way, and the road was nicely brought through the area. It's one of those places where when you have a visitor from out of town, you drive them along the parkway, and it's, people comment on its beauty and so forth. But of course, it's an intentional space. It's a design space, as is the whole parkway system. And trees are not accidentally where they are, and the road alignment is not accidentally the way it is. And Peter and I were talking earlier about the contrast between that kind of a space and something like the Walker Sculpture Garden, which is much more readily perceived as a designed exterior space, and then Theodore Wirth Parkway being not perceived as a design space.
That's right. So the public may get very similar aesthetic experiences from both, but of course the design and the implementation were quite different.
That's right.
Now, Peter, just for a little background, what's been your role with what we know as the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden?
Well, I've been involved with it since just before it opened, mostly on the art side, locating the work and choosing the work and things like that, and also to an extent in the planning of the extension.
Okay, so the Walker literally curates the space.
Yeah,
Part of your
it's
job.
a partnership with the Minneapolis Parks Board, and they maintain the space and everything, and so that leaves us just responsible for the art.
Okay.
It's worked out really well.
And just in the fall of '92, of course, there was an expansion that probably a lot of folks are
Expansion,
aware of.
right.
Isn't that? Can we talk, either of you, a little bit about what I think of as the tension, perhaps, between art, discrete individual pieces of art, and the landscape, and how do those get resolved? You're a landscape architect. Your palette is the landscape. How do you approach working with artists or pieces of art?
Well, I think when you get into the landscape, the public domain, more public perhaps than the sculpture garden, along a highway, for example, or an intersection that you might come to in town, I think that there are places where the work of the artist needs to be integrated with what's going on in the landscape, as opposed to just being object-oriented. My domain, the domain of the landscape architect, really is space and movement through space rather than objects in space. And so there is a real tension if an artist is brought into a project as a separate entity, brought in late in the game, that sort of thing. There gets to be this thing about where does the piece go, how should it fit. To me, the whole experience is one that's an artful experience, if you will. The design of the landscape, as we pointed out with Wirth Parkway, is an artful design, and the ability for sculpture or other kinds of experiences within those spaces, it seems to me, could be much more integrated than it typically is.
Go ahead.
I think that most artists working in that situation would prefer to be part of the whole process from the very start, so that they're not relegated to plopping an object somewhere, but can really work with a landscape architect and everything to create a really cohesive whole.
The Percent for Art thing is an example of where that is beginning to happen a lot more, and we're working with artists regularly on teams.
Do you have a similar experience as a landscape architect? Are you brought in early enough on some projects?
Did I feed you that question?
No, you didn't, but it occurred to me as you're saying that, because I do consider landscape architecture essentially an artful form as much as a piece of sculpture might
Well,
be.
yeah, it is one of our classic complaints that we're brought in very late to deal with a building, for example. The building has been designed sometimes with minimal attention to context, and whether it's an urban situation or even a very pastoral rural situation, we can get sort of brought in at the tail end, and that's a difficult position to be in.
Yeah, harder to design it
Yeah.
well. And
I think the situation is the same with artists, that oftentimes they're brought in and given this space that didn't really work out and told, here, make it look good.
yeah,
That's right.
yeah. Now, you've written in the past, I read an article you wrote a year and a half ago in Public Art Review about how often a public artist creates a piece that's fairly conventional and or site-specific. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you meant by that. I'm probably garbling the gist of what you meant, but
Well, I think that I was talking specifically about sculpture gardens, and that I think up till now that people who've been running it, including us, I think, have thought in fairly conventional terms, in terms of objects in the landscape, and that really we need to be more creative about that. And as you were talking about, sort of creating an experience that you pass through, rather than just an object that you walk past.
Okay. What were some of the big challenges with the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden? I mean, you're bound there by some institutions, by some residences on the other side, and a tremendous traffic flow there. I mean, a highway.
Yeah. Well, one of the challenges was just the ground itself, which is a marsh, basically. So when they put in the bridge and the conservatory and stuff, they had to put pilings down about 60 feet, I think, before they hit anything solid. And now when we put in sculptures in, we have to put in huge cement footings underneath them.
Oh, as a base to
Yeah,
support.
to keep them from just sinking into the ground.
Could be the Leaning Tower of Pisa here.
Rumor is that somewhere out there there's a locomotive that sunk
that
into the
right?
ground and it's been buried for.
Well, on the
100 years
north
or
end
so.
of your site, what I forget the name of the creek, but it's an underground bed, as I understand it, coming from North Minneapolis.
Well, it's
Right.
the old riverbed. The old
That's what
Mississippi
I'm trying-
riverbed went through
the
that
Mississippi
area.
itself.
Right.
Didn't realize that.
Right.
Well, that's
Yeah, there's
interesting.
an underground tunnel there. It's-
What are some of the other issues that landscape architects wrestle with when they're asked to develop a site or to work with the development of a site? What are some of the challenges, maybe some of the victories that you're able to come up with?
Well, I think really again, it's an educational process for a landscape architect in this part of the world. We are trying to always communicate the fact that our profession deals with movement. It's not static at all. It's hard to photograph landscape architecture. I've had people ask for photographs for articles in the past, and they've been really frustrated because it's not object-oriented, it's spatial. And Larry Halpern, of course, the original designer of the Nicollet Mall, his wife is a dancer, and he often said that choreography was the best, the most closely aligned thing he could think of to what he did as a landscape architect. So we are always trying to educate people about the importance of paying attention to sequence, to movement, and how you can affect the human experience dealing with those kinds of design parameters. Lately, our office has been working on some highway beautification projects, and we've had artists incorporated into the team, and again, we've tried very hard not to separate it out and say, okay, there are going to be a series of objects through this space, but the intention is to have the artists work with us as a team and deal with this entire space. And it's been effective, it's been enjoyable, sometimes not easy, but...
And you're talking about the relationships here, the kind of the tension between
yes,
the different
right. But I
disciplines.
think that there's this evolution that people are understanding more about landscape architecture, more about the ability of working in teams and those kinds
One of the
things.
projects I know you've worked on not too long back, and probably is still on the table somewhere, is the I-394 approach
right.
into downtown. Can you just sketch that real briefly about some of the ideas that you were putting into that?
Yeah, it's we like to call it the Prairie Parkway because we're looking at developing a low-maintenance space. We've only taken this thing through schematic design, and there were some other folks in town who had worked on it previous to our involvement. And as you say, it's sitting somewhere on a table right now, but I do think that it will eventually occur. But unlike the Capitol Precinct in St. Paul, where the design team that started implementing the things you see over there started working 10 years ahead of the fact with the engineers, and they could incorporate things. Here, the design was in place, part of the freeway was in place when we got involved last year. And really the key was to try to retrofit, come in after the fact again, and make the space more visually interesting, more appropriate to being a major gateway into a major city through an arts district and so forth. So the concepts we were trying to deal with on that project really were ones of trying to bring arts components into the freeway, but doing it in a way that could be retrofitted. So we're looking at actually things that can be affixed to existing retaining walls that will support plant growth. We call it the matrix.
Okay.
We're looking at that also as a freestanding element on side slopes and so forth, as well as heavy use of prairie grasses and wildflowers. but not just randomly spread, but in patterns through that space.
Well, now, as you describe that, that sounds to me, I'll just use the word creative approach to, you know, a transportation corridor there. And you use the word creative. Peter, any ideas, or when you talk about being a little more creative in developing these kind of public settings, what are some of your ideas or dreams, if you have them?
Well, speaking specifically about the sculpture garden, we don't have a lot of the restrictions that people working in a genuinely public space would have. So we view ourselves really as a laboratory where we can sort of experiment and work out ideas, and maybe as a result of that, in the genuine public sphere, some of those ideas can filter out there. But really, we're in a luxurious position, not having to deal with much bureaucracy or anything like that.
You can call your own
Having
shots.
a lot
Mom.
of freedom.
Yeah.
And the artists love it, of course.
What, there obviously is, but could you describe the relationship of, if I may say, the collection out in the sculpture garden and the collection inside your gallery spaces? How is that integrated, or is it?
In various ways. I mean, quite a few of the pieces out there, about a third of them, I'd say, were works that we had before we ever dreamed of a sculpture garden. So some of them we showed in the galleries or on the terraces of the museum. Also, I'd say about a third of the artists that are outside, we also have pieces by inside. So you can sort of make a comparison between the same person working inside and outside. You get an idea of the different situations that they're dealing with. And more, what we'd like to do is integrate the garden with our indoor programming, so that when we have a show of an artist or something, that they'll do an outdoor component also.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because what we're really interested in, the garden has attracted a lot of attention, and now we're trying to bring people who may have been a little intimidated by contemporary art or something, bring them in the galleries.
So in the best sense of the word, it's almost an introduction. I mean, it brings people in. Any plans for yet more phases out there?
Not for any expansion. I think
Okay.
we're pretty much expanded, but we'll be putting some new pieces out there in the spring.
Oh, that'll be interesting.
Some benches
This
by Jenny
spring, then,
Holzer.
93.
Yeah.
Great. We've got a minute or two left, and I wanted to ask each of you. I'll start with Peter. Favorite spots to see art, in addition to the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden here that you're involved in? But for our viewers, what do you like to encounter when you're out in Minneapolis? Or for that matter, maybe around the country if people are traveling?
Well, I just came back from a trip. I was in San Diego, and the University of California has a sculpture project going out on the campus down there, where there are some wonderful pieces by Robert Irwin and Richard Fleischner, Alexis Smith, a lot lot of people, good program going on.
And it's in a landscape area, I'm assuming?
Yeah, it's on a university campus.
Okay.
So
That's good. Bob, within your field, any
Well-
places that are favorites within what you do? And
Yeah, you speak of Bob Irwin, and his work is really very, very site-oriented and site-specific, and very landscape architectural in a way. And so I think that it's always fun to stumble upon spaces by people like that. But I really like the, in fact, I have a quote of Irwin's that I brought along, which I didn't bring here, but out into the room here, but he basically talked about the mystery or excitement of coming upon something you didn't expect.
Yeah.
And that's the power of the landscape.
Sure.
And for me, it's just those moments that happen, and they may be natural, and they may be contrived, if you will, man-made, but they are unexpected surprises. They happen everywhere.
Lots of places to
there's
see
a
that.
wonderful piece actually in San Diego of a tree by an artist named Terry Allen that it's a singing tree, basically, and you're walking through this grove and you start hearing this music and wondering where it's coming
Well, that's a nice integration. Folks, we're just done with our segment, and we could go on with this, so maybe we can talk at a future date. Peter, thanks for joining us.
Sure.
Bob,
Great.
great to have you on the show. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I thought that was a great discussion. If you're interested in anything we've talked about and want a little more information, feel free to call the City Cable 34 hotline, 673-2234. Now, you've heard me say it. You can see it on the screen. Tune in next month. We're going to have a special show dealing with Generation X and what some young people are doing in the fields of art. And at the end of this show, there's a short calendar of events going on in Minneapolis. See you next time. I'm Phill Lindsay.